Hello, folks. It's your host, Tori. I'm so excited to present the following legacy episode, an interview with Lee Houskeeper, a very close friend of Phil's. Sunny Ochs passed on his contact info to me when I was visiting her, so I sent him an email, and about 10 seconds later my phone rang. Turns out it was Houskeeper. Lee was an utter delight to talk to and a captivating storyteller. I sincerely hope you're just as enthralled listening to him as I was. By the way, Lee, if you're listening, I'm sorry I misspelled your name in that first email. Did you know it's spelled wrong in 2 biographies? For the record, it's Houskeeper. If you're a fan of God Help the Troubadour, please consider becoming a patron. Visit patreon.com/GodHelpTheTroubadour for behind-the-scenes content, early access to episodes, and extended cuts of interviews, including the one you're about to hear. Pledges start at just $3 a month. Supporting me on Patreon will help me afford research materials, recording equipment, subscription fees to my hosting site and Zoom, etc., all to ensure a quality experience for podcast listeners like you. If you've enjoyed the show so far, your support can only make it better. Thank you so much to all my patrons and everyone who's listened so far. Your support means the world to me. Thank you again to Lee Houskeeper for sharing your story. Your contribution to this project was vital. Trigger warning for some discussion of suicide. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to God Help the Troubadour. I'm here with Lee Houskeeper. Why don't you tell me what you're doing here with me today?
Oh, Tori, I had a delightful conversation with you that went on for 30, 45 minutes, maybe more. And I was so happy to hear that you, I'm sure you don't mind, or I hope you don't mind me calling you a young lady, would be interested in those things that happened so many years ago. I've had the occasion to get to know some people, not many, over the years, who have been fascinated by what occurred in the 60s and 70s, and I wind up learning a lot from them because they're studying it, and I just happen to have lived through it. So I wasn't taking notes.
All right. So,
oh, did you want me to set it up in some?
If you like, if you'd like to say something else, that's fine.
No. You asked me the question.
Okay. So, tell me how you met Phil. What was the first thing that struck you about him?
I was living in New York City, down in the Village, and I had left California in 67, 68. I was hired to Agency for the Performing Arts when I was 20. And they're a big agent. They were, well, they still are around. They're a big agency. Their home office was on West 57th Street in New York. And I was brought in to book East Coast dates on Jim Morrison and the Doors, Janis Joplin and Big Brother, the Chambers Brothers, the Jefferson Airplane, and a number of other artists that had all of a sudden or had gone from clubs to doing major concerts. And so the agency felt that they needed to have somebody that knew these artists, and I had known them on the West Coast, to essentially go get them on stage and bring the money home. And so that's what brought me to New York. But by the time I had met Phil, I had moved from APA to having worked for David Geffen as his first assistant, and that he had, and my job was I was brought into Crosby, Stills and Nash through my friend Dallas Taylor, who was a drummer in the band that I had been working with in Los Angeles called Clearlight, that introduced me to everybody, that brought me to New York. And Dallas brought into my office Stephen Stills when they were putting together Crosby, Stills and Nash. And I wound up assisting them in getting them in their efforts to get rehearsal space out in Long Island at Sag Harbor, and equipment where they would spend a winter putting together and creating. A lot of it hadn't been written. The album, the first album. And then when they went to the West Coast to record that album, David went with them and left me with the duties of taking care of as a road manager, quasi manager of Laura Nyro, who was a very famous singer songwriter, passed away some years ago, and was an enormous talent. And I think it was at that time I was walking around the area of New York, that wasn't the Upper West Side, it would be sort of between Central Park and Times Square. There on the avenues of the Americas, there, 6th Avenue or 7th, there's a number of record companies. And I was out there working on a record deal for a group called Dreams that I signed to Columbia Records. And I was on the street and I saw walking down the street the unmistakable visage of Doug Weston, who I had become very friendly with in Los Angeles before having gone to New York. And then on my trips to Los Angeles, would go to the Troubadour. We were in the Troubadour just about every night from, I'd say, 66 to when I left. And then when I was back, I was almost there. And then when I came back to Los Angeles in 72, I was in the Troubadour. So Doug and I were very good friends. And I think you could see him 3 blocks ahead. In New York City, it's the maddening crowd of people, you know, just going by. You don't see anybody you know generally. So there's Doug. Hey, Doug, how are you? Hey. So we had a reunion there on the street, and he said, "Do you want to see Phil Ochs tonight?" And I said, "Yeah, I haven't seen him before." He said, "Well, he's playing Carnegie Hall. We'll put you on the list and you come." And I did. I went there, and I was there to witness Phil getting angry out in front at the box office, where he had left names of a lot of people who somehow got jammed up. Their names weren't there. Word got back to him, and my name was there, of course, probably because Doug did it. And but Phil comes rushing out. He's got a gold lame suit on. My first vision of Phil, and he's screaming at the union lady. Doesn't care. It's Carnegie Hall. This will pass, this Phil Ochs madness. He's going back to, the concerts and Belafonte and the Philharmonic and whatever else happens at Carnegie Hall. And Phil Ochs is a passing nightmare to her, and he can't get her to give him attention, let alone any respect. She didn't even know if it's Phil Ochs. She just think it's a madman, I'm sure. So he takes his fist and he slams this wire reinforced glass, honeycombed so that nobody can take her money. And I think he broke his hand. Well, he certainly injured himself. And he shattered the shatterproof glass. It held together, but that was Phil Ochs. So I said, well, that's going to be the end of that concert. He plays guitar. But no, he managed to get up on stage. And in the movie, if anybody's seen it, where the producers, where they come out and sing "Springtime for Hitler" for the first time, and the audience and all the mouths go. that was the reaction of Phil Ochs fans to him coming out in gold lame.
Oh my God.
And he had gotten a jacket, he told me subsequently, from, I believe, Nudie, who was a famous haberdasher to the stars on Hollywood Boulevard, and who had done, I found out much later that he had, when we became much closer friends, that he had this obsession with Elvis. And so he knew everything about Elvis, and he knew, we went by Nudies on Hollywood Boulevard on our rounds. And that's where he got this gold lame suit. The concert was less than memorable, but to me it was heroic, and it was more of a art than music. It was like a what do they call it?
Performance art.
Performance art. Thank you very much. That's what I was searching for. So after it was over, I was walking out and saw Doug. And Doug said, "Why don't you join us? And we're going to go down to the village." "Oh, I live down there." "Okay, great. I'll be close." We went to somebody's flat, and there were a number of Phil Ochs admirers, and Phil was holding court, and considerable drinking going on. And Phil began to play chess, and he was playing with people. Okay, and it came time for my introduction, which Doug felt compliant. Some wanted to. Well, he actually wanted to get Phil's blood boiling. So prior to my being involved with rock and roll bands and in psychedelic rock and roll bands in Los Angeles, I had gotten myself a job in the mailroom of the Ronald Reagan for Governor campaign, because I thought maybe I might get some contacts in show business. And somehow I wound up working my way as a 17, 18-year-old in up to advancing some dates for Ronald Reagan, and working the old PBX telephone thing, which you might remember from Lily Tomlin, made famous. After the operator left at 5 o'clock, she had trained me to do that. Essentially a runner for Ronald Reagan, which put me in a lot of very interesting situations. They had behind the headquarters on Wilshire these brand new Lincoln Continentals donated by one of his major donors, Holmes Tuttle, and they had telephones in them. Filled the trunk. They were shipped ashore telephones before cellular. And when I got to, somebody tossed me the keys and said, "Go do this errand or do that errand." I'd be hours calling people. "That's where I am." And when the campaign was over, they had offered me a job, as was the custom in those days, in Sacramento. Assistant to the head of civil defense, $9,000 some dollars. Oh my God, it was great. But I went to Sacramento and I looked around and I went, "Ooh, I left Illinois because it looked like this. And I really want to be in showbiz." I didn't know what area of show business, but I wanted to be in Hollywood. And so I left there. My mother insisted that I go back to school, went to LA City College and began working my way through school by installing, which I knew how to do, car stereos across the street on Melrose. And one of my customers was a guy named Jim Morrison. And this is when he was playing at the Sea Witch on Sunset with the Doors for $500, $750 a night, something like that. And he had asked me, "Have you been down to Sunset? You've seen what's going on there?" He took some interest in me because his father was an admiral And so he was fascinated by the fact that I had left the Reagan campaign. And I went down to Sunset Boulevard and I saw the Doors, and it was such a small scene back then. You would have loved it, Tori, because everybody, the 100, 200, maybe a few more than that, including the audience, including the people who later became stars, some who were already stars, would run into Cass Elliot each night. She remembered my name. She was, "Hey, Lee."
Oh.
That was so she was always a favorite of mine for remembering me. And as the Doors' popularity grew to the Whiskey a Go-Go, and I got introduced to another group who were about to record or just finished recording for Elektra Records, same producer as Paul Rothschild as the Doors. And I wound up taking road manager, quasi-manager duties for this group called Clear Light. And that's how on the road and working with the agent for all those bands, Todd Schiffman out of Los Angeles, that I wound up going to New York. And so getting back to the flat and now dwindling crowd to maybe 6 or 8 people, when Doug introduced me as having worked for Ronald Reagan, I thought, well, that's the end of this, right? I'm going to be tossed out on my butt. He said, "Sit down. Let's play chess." Okay. And we're playing chess, and he's making an argument for Che Guevara. And he's prodding me to talk about Ronald Reagan. So we get into this amazing conversation where I don't really care about that politics, but it seemed appropriate to provide some, to get him going, and he seemed to love it. So, we got into like a debate class where you get one side, get the other, and it culminated in, and now there's maybe 3 people left in the room. Not even sure if Doug stayed, and it's him and me, and it gets down to where I'm not a good chess player, so he had to be terrible. So I'm winning, and he says to me, he says, "Okay, Houskeeper, can I take my own rook? Can I take my own pawn?" And I said, "Well, that's your idea of a revolution. I want no part of it." And he laughs and he clears the chessboard and, "Okay, you won. You beat me. I don't know how you did." Okay. So that was our introduction. We didn't meet at all again. And about a year later, as was part of a plan that I had of doing 4 years in New York, I moved back to Los Angeles, to Los Feliz. And a friend of mine that I'd met in New York had gotten an incredible apartment for $120 a month and $60. And I had put a little money away, and I figured I'd worked my way through high school, all of this, and I'd never had a day off. And I said, I'm going to learn how to play tennis, read books. And I think on the 3rd day, and nobody knew where I was. And on the 3rd day or 4th day in this apartment, knock on the front screen door, and it's Phil. He said, "You're hard to find." Yes, I am hard to find. And he said, "Come on." And he has a girl's lady Schwinn bicycle. I think it was pink. A basket, and it had a horn, as I recall. And I had a bicycle. I had a multi-gear a Peugeot. Men's. Easy. And he said, "We're going to go riding. Let's go get a hamburger." Okay. And he was into, at that time, as I found out a little later, trying to be healthy. He hadn't been healthy. I didn't know anything about it. I knew about that one show. I hadn't run into a lot of friends of his who later on told me he had so many of the talented people that I had the privilege to work with and know, bipolar, and would have difficulty with alcohol and drugs and what have you. And so he was on a health kick. When he got onto something, he was focused. So he was going to ride and from West Hollywood, where he lived, on Rangeley to where I was in Los Feliz on Rodney Drive. It must have taken him 40 minutes to ride his bicycle. Easy, I would think. It's a big thing. So this was back and forth. He was going to get into shape. When we got back after going to a nearby, and every hamburger place in Los Angeles is famous. There are hundreds of famous hamburger places in Los Angeles, especially in those days. So we sit down and he pulls out a reporter's notebook and he says, okay, and he grills me with this reporter's notebook about what I felt about the hamburger. And let's start with the bun. Was it, well, it was toasted, it was okay. And then was the meat sufficient? It was okay. And so on and so forth about the hamburger. And he fills it into this reporter's notebook and he says, okay, well, here's what I'm going to do. He says, what I want to do, and if you want to do this with me, and mind you, I had nothing to do. I was going to try to learn how to play tennis. Never did. And I was going to read some books. I did do that. And he said, this sounded to me like perfect, great. And I can get back into Los Angeles, which I never really had gotten to know, the side streets and different things, and it's perfect. So he said, what we're going to do is do this every day in search of the great Los Angeles hamburger. And so I start getting creative with him. Okay, well, listen, I've got a postal scale, and a little tiny postal scale. Great, we bring that with us. We'll weigh the bun. We'll order a third hamburger. We'll weigh the bun. We'll take the lettuce and the pickles and whatever else. We'll weigh the hamburger. That should be part of how we review these hamburgers. And so we did this by bicycle almost every day. And we did Tommy's, we did, I can't even remember some of them. I'll try and remember famous places, and some not so famous, some just hamburger places. Some had were made from big paper mache hamburger or something, plastered hamburgers. Let's try that place. And secretly, although we never said it out loud, I kind of hoped that the proprietor or whoever was serving us our hamburgers would maybe think we're reporters. And a reporter's notebook. What are these guys doing? Ordering 3 hamburgers, writing everything down. Maybe they might comp us. Working press. We'll buy that hamburger. Never happened. Nobody noticed us. We didn't interview anybody. We just did what he had set out the goal to be. And those notes would have been a great book. And in a hurried move where he was going to move back east, or he had moved one way or the other, it had some crazy speed freak friend with a truck, and who somewhere along the line, something happened to the truck full of his stuff, including the notes, all the notes to the Great American Hamburger adventure that went on. So while I was I wasn't in that apartment too long, maybe a year, and I got a great little house, 2 bedrooms with a little guest house and a tiny little pool in the back, uh, right behind the Troubadour. And that was several blocks away from where Phil lived on Rangeley. And so daily he was at the house. Now, I hung out very late into the nights, and he would be there with his New York Times um, at the door. No, he's out by the pool with his backgammon board, waiting to play. When I would wake up, never came and woke me up. Just would wait. Hey, Phil, want a cup of coffee? Yeah. Okay. And so this went on for several years. And what else? During the course of this, we just talked and talked and talked. Politics, outside of politics, I never would have heard. I mean, this was before all the 24-hour news and channels and before the internet. And I had no knowledge of and he went down, he would go off on various trips, and he had gone at one time was extremely devastated by a folk singer that he knew that had been killed in Chile during the CIA sponsored overthrow of Allende. And it's famous story. It's been in movies, but he knew the guy very well. And the guy referred to himself as, as Phil Ochs of, is it Chile? I think.
Chile, Victor Jara.
Victor Jara. Thank you very much. And he sat me down and said, he saw a blank and said, let me tell you about Victor Jara. Let me tell you about Allende. Let me tell you what that is all about and what I'm all about and why this. And so I never would have had that experience or be educated in that way, informed about things like that. So Phil kept very well informed. As I said, he read the New York Times every day. He read a lot of publications every day. There were in those days huge newsstands in Los Angeles where you could get everything from everywhere. And that's the way. I mean, we had 4 or maybe 5 TV channels. That was it. That was before cable, rabbit ears. And during this time of my enlightenment through Phil, I never became a lefty, but I sure did. And he wanted me to debate him, and he never became a moderate. We would have called me a Republican, but that wasn't the case. But he did listen. He was a marvelous listener. That's a quality that very few people have, including me. I always think of Phil and want to listen more as he did, without interjecting my opinion. Or he clearly wanted to understand. He found out that I had casually met John Wayne and thought that I then was John Wayne's best friend for some reason. And he wanted to talk to John Wayne. He wanted John Wayne to talk to him and get why John Wayne is John Wayne. That obsession with John Wayne led to later, as you know, his persona of John Train. So all this is going on Lloyd Street in that house. And at that time, just like today, we're talking about what the news of the day is, but we'd spend hours talking about Nixon. And both of us had one thing that we shared in common. Despite my Republican roots, I hated Nixon, and he hated Nixon with a passion. And so we're just following every detail of Watergate. The Watergate hearings come on, and I have console television in the living room, and that couch that he's on is right directly across from him is the console. And they began running early in the morning, California time, because it was 3 hours ahead. They began running the Watergate hearings, Sam Ervin's famous congressional Watergate hearings and Senate Watergate hearings. And he would be there every day to watch them from that couch. And I would get up somewhere into it. But we both also knew that they would run it starting at 3 or 4 in the afternoon. They'd run it again. So word got out. And during the afternoon sessions, we started drawing a crowd of characters like the actor Peter Lawford, these Swedish models that somehow I met and were fascinated by this, and a guy who became friends with till he just passed away, an actor by the name of Stuart Whitman, cowboy actor who had made a lot of movies with John Wayne. So of course, Phil just loved Stuart, and Stuart was a lefty at that time. And we had, Ron Cobb, who passed away. He was a very, very well-known free press political cartoonist.
I actually have some artwork of his tattooed on my leg.
Oh, no kidding. Well, he was a buddy of mine. He did my Christmas card that I've sent out every year with the little baby Jesus in the manger. And he got involved with Spielberg, and first he got involved with Alien. Mm-hmm. And so we'd go out onto his office, Bill and I, because he wasn't union, they put him far away. And he'd say, watch what I can do. And he'd pick up the phone and he said, this is Mr. Cobb, could you send a tank over here? And a tank would come and take us to the commissary for lunch. So we had all these people that would come for the afternoon, early evening Watergate hearings. And through the course of this, it wasn't hard for anybody to figure out that he was going to resign. And it wasn't hard for anybody to figure out when it was going to be, down to being able to figure out the time. So we decided to throw a happy resignation party and get the word out. So the place packed out with my rock friends, Steve Cropper. I think we even had Ringo there.
Wow.
We had, might have had Keith Moon there. I'm pretty sure I had Harry Nilsson there. John Prine came, and he actually wound up renting this house from me after I moved out of that house. So it was incredible. And there was Phil, the center of it all, because he was the oracle. And he was intensely watching this. There wasn't any, don't bother me. And we'd wait for any pronouncement that he would make. And through the door, now I'm involved with the media and the press, but I wasn't then. A little bit, but mostly entertainment press. Through the door comes a guy named Wayne Satz, who is a one-man investigative news guy for ABC. You'd heard about it. I might have called. I can't remember. And he films all this. In those days, they filmed it, your news. And that film is in the Phil Ochs movie of everybody just. And Phil, when interviewed after the resignation, was furious, and said, I think it's in the movie that he has to be held accountable. It has to be held accountable. All of us were just happy he was gone. Yeah. But this actually paved the way for my feelings about Trump. It's not enough that he's gone.
Yeah.
He has to be held accountable. And Phil was right then. And Phil would be right now in being, this guy has got to go down for what he did. So not too long after that, and during that time, a little bit, Phil started exhibiting to me his dark side. And he was still trying to stay sober. And he had been out on these various trips. He had been mugged in Africa, I think it was, and had serious concerns about whether he could ever sing again. So he was dealing with, he was already, in my view, manic depressive. But now it's exacerbated. And he would come to the house and say to me, because I was in rock and roll, I had a lot of rock and roll friends, and he'd say, Lee, you get me drugs so I can kill myself. I need drugs so I can kill myself. Pills, whatever you can get me. I did not know how to respond. I just, whatever, I was 25. I'd never encountered anything. And I said, I said, fuck you. Go home and stick your head in your oven. I don't want to have to deal with you dying. Go fuck yourself. Go stick your head in your oven. And I thought that was going to be sufficient to bring him around. Who knew that this was, in those days, I think that the only treatment for this kind of depression was lithium, which was mind-numbing, terrible, terrible drug. Subsequently, now they've come up with things that are a little less horrible. But that's all his options were, and he fell into drinking. Not so much, but where he was pretty much a non-drinker except for an occasional beer at a poker game that we would have. So he told me he was going to go back. I saw him being in danger, and he told me that he was going to go back to, I think, Boston, Concord, for something that the lefties were putting together about the anniversary of the shot fired around the world that started the revolution. This is before the bicentennial of 1776, it would be 1775. So it would have been 1970. And I said, oh, don't do that. It's not going to be good. No, I've got to go. I'll be okay. I can handle it. You can tell him anything. And he came back, and sure enough, he was off the wagon. And when he was off the wagon, he was very, very difficult for anybody to deal with. So his friends started shunning him. And I still would play backgammon with him. And one morning, I got a call from his brother, Michael Ochs. And he said, the night before, Phil had been arrested and was in jail in Beverly Hills for sleeping in his car. They came up to him and he had been sleeping. It was asleep in his car behind the Troubadour. And he had in the car machete and God knows what else. So they took him in. And Michael said, look, we have to have him held for his own safety. And so we're going to make an effort with the judge. Well, it's pretty hard to do that, especially if you've had the night before. The ACLU has been pretty good about that. I mean, that's part of the thing. We have so many homeless people that are brought up in front of a judge, but they had a night to sleep it off. And unless somebody is really acting out, the judge isn't going to put him away. Phil had seen that somebody had made an effort to get him put away, and he was furious. And he comes over to my door. Boom, boom, boom. Did you have any part of this? I said, yes, I did. You're the only honest friend I have. Everybody else says that denied it. You're president of Barricade now. Oh, well, great. But I'm not going to talk to you. Off he goes. And, well, we talked a lot. And I got a phone call from him that he was doing some crazy backgammon tournament in New York. And he begged me to go to New York for this. And I did. And it was a sad affair. And, but I wanted to show him some support. And pretty much the last time I saw him. And I had moved from that apartment to a place overlooking Universal, really great old house. And one night, I got a call from Phil. And he said, well, I've talked to you about this before, but tonight I'm going to do it. I'm going to hang myself. This time I wasn't going to go fuck you, hang yourself. I expressed concern and tried to talk him out of it. And he was dead set saying, it is what it is. I just wanted to call you and tell you you're my best friend. And where are you? Long Island. I think he said. And that was that. We hung up. I called his brother immediately. And not too long after that, I can't remember if it was the next day or even that night, I got the call that he had done it, that he had hung himself in his sister's house in her closet. And I was devastated. I went over to the apartment that he no longer had on Rangeley, put a flower on the door. I was in a funk for weeks over this loss. And also because he had involved me. Anyway, I missed some things in there, as you know, the recording. It's just an overall sketch, and if you have some specific things that you want me to address, just ask me the questions.
Right. I was going to ask this a little later, but if you had one more chance to see Phil or speak to him, what would you say?
I did.
I mean,
I did.
I mean, if
Last
he was
year.
still with us.
Last year.
Last year?
Uh-huh. I was with Phil. I'll tell you how it happened.
Tell me.
Death of a Rebel, the book about Phil Ochs, Eliot's book, was optioned by Sean Penn. He was going to make the movie, and there's nobody that could have made a better Phil Ochs than Sean Penn. Things happened. It never got made. And my doctor is also a friend and a doctor of Sean Penn, even though he's in San Francisco. And I got a call from him saying, Sean has got a book out and he's going to be doing a little lecture in San Francisco. Would you like to come? And it happened to have been on the anniversary, 40th anniversary, perhaps, but one of the big number anniversaries of the night that Phil had called me to tell me he was going to hang himself, and then subsequently he did. So I went and was ushered backstage because of my doctor's relationship with Sean. And there's a million groupie type people or people that are friends of Sean's. And my doctor had told him that I was coming. And he knew that I was friends with Phil. And he comes up to me and and he says, you were friends with Phil. I read about you in the book that I had optioned. It's nice to meet you. You would have made a great Phil. Did you know that this is the anniversary of the night he comes? Oh, no, I didn't. Let's go to dinner. And we went to a place called Tosca's in North Beach. And all these people that were going to eat dinner with him, he had them sit at another table, and he just sat with me, and he started to become Phil Ochs. He actually, I felt that I had, and he's an actor. He showed me that he would have been the best Phil Ochs ever. He became Phil Ochs to me. I actually said, and I think he knew he was doing it. We talked politics. We talked just like Phil Ochs would have talked to me about current events. And I'm pretty sure he did this as an exercise, as an actor, for me, as an audience. And it was 2.5 hours of being with Phil. Up in 2 years ago, actually, just before the pandemic. So I was able to talk to Sean in the same way that I would have talked to Phil about current events, politics, social stuff. And he answered me and responded to me as Phil Ochs. How cool is that?
That's great. Is that why you call conversations like this visiting with ghosts?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like visiting with ghosts. It's I have when I see a movie with Stewart in it, it's visiting with ghosts. It's like the purpose that's fulfilled by going to a person's memorial. I will take a Sunday like today and I'll put on some music, which I don't do every day. I do it on Sundays, sometimes on Saturdays. And sometimes I'll pick like Phil Ochs. So I'm visiting with Phil Ochs by doing that, or Laura Nero, or somebody else. And the occasion of a Zoom interview or an in-person interview, which happened before, where I'm asked to reminisce, because I don't remember all these details unless I'm in a situation like this, and that gives me the chance to, it's all there in your head. Everything that's ever happened to you is there, and it would take you sitting down with an old friend when you get to be my age, and you will. Despite some days you think you may not, but you will. And you'll be surprised that everything's there.
Yeah. Speaking of Phil's music, you said you'd like to put him on sometimes. Do you have any go-to albums or songs?
Well, I like Pleasures of the Harbor, and I have different reactions at different times. I found some of his music to be not so accessible to me. And then during Trump years, I go and revisit and go, wait a minute, that's pretty damn good. But Love Me, Love Me, Love Me, I'm a liberal. And I like the more melodic ballads that showcase his incredible tenor, his voice. So, I mean, off the top of my head, I'd have to take a look at that song list and go, yeah, that one, or I was just listening to that.
The more lyrical songs, I think, are very underrated when it comes to Phil. He's usually kind of pigeonholed as the protest guy, but he was such a great poet as well.
Oh, he's fantastic. I went night before last to see a jazz singer, Paula West, here in San Francisco, and she loves doing Dylan songs. And it would be like, Ella doing Dylan. Soulful, but the lyrics and the way she brings the lyrics out to where you really get another perspective. Black woman singing. And then she sang Born to Run by Bruce Springsteen. I mean to call her and tell her, don't do that again, because those lyrics are not awful. There are songs that you love, but the lyrics suck.
So I have a couple questions that you could probably call self-indulgent, but I'm asking out of genuine curiosity. You did mention that Harry Nilsson was probably there for the Nixon resignation party. So I assume Phil and Harry met.
Oh yeah, it was small. Excuse me for using the obvious. It was a small circle of friends, and the people that I was hanging out with many times would wind up at either my recording studio, Clover, or which Phil frequently hung out and just show up. What's going on? And not to record. He never recorded at Clover that I can remember. Or at my house on Lloyd. I mean, Harry needed to be the center of attention. So I don't think it was the kind of thing where they had met and then decided to go off. And
right.
It's happened often. But, Harry was very smart too.
Yeah, I like to play a fun game of 7 Degrees of Phil Ochs and see who I can connect to him, because I also grew up with Harry, as I mentioned on the phone before, so they're two of my favorite artists. So it's very nice to know that they interacted with each other. I knew they sort of ran with the same crowd, but yeah.
Not really. I mean, there was sort of a separate kind of artistic performance artist kind of thing with Phil, political people, Tom Hayden's and Jerry Rubin's and some of the politics and music. Most of the musicians, well, Harry's an exception, but most of the musicians weren't all that keen on politics. So you wouldn't find, but Phil was such a guy, like Steve Cropper, who came from the South and all of that. Phil and Steve got along because they both liked to talk and communicate. It wasn't all about them. It was about, and Steve loved Phil, loves him very much. Harry was moving a little bit too quick for everybody. Phil wasn't into coke. Phil could handle the drinking part, but when it would go into rapid mouth movement,
wasn't an upper kind of guy. I got you.
No, he was the opposite. I think he would prefer downers.
Right. Okay, I have another self-indulgent question. So I've read that Phil's favorite album was Astral Weeks by Van Morrison, and I'm wondering if you know anything about that or about his experience with that record.
No. I'm sure that he played a lot of records at his Rangeley apartment, and I'm sure we'd listen to it, probably in the background of a poker game, but for some reason, I can't recall him rushing in and saying, you got to hear this record. There were movies and there were books, and there was a story in the New York Times that he demanded that I read. But I really don't recall us. I mean, that his incredible emotional description of that singer whose name we mentioned before. We did talk about Dylan He was a great admirer of Dylan's, and there was a lot of talk about his being jealous. I never saw that at all. He was just a great admirer of Dylan's. And I told you that I had the opportunity to tell Dylan that I was in an office in a record company. I was doing A&R for, and they also had a rehearsal studio, and Dylan was using it for something. And he came by, and I had a nice couch and a lamp and a little settee stand there. And I had my desk and had bright lights. And he stuck his head in and said, "Can I sit here?" While he was waiting to go back to the rehearsals. "Yeah, if you don't mind, no, you continue to do whatever it is you're doing," which I did. Kind of. It's Dylan. It's right there. And at the end of what seemed like an hour, and I think it probably was only 15 or 20 minutes maybe, he was getting ready to leave, and I said, "Thank me." And I said, "I was very close with Phil Ochs." "Yeah." I said, and I, forgive me, I said, "I don't mean to speak out of school, but there's a talk that he was very jealous of you and felt that his death, because he had killed himself, especially around the time that he hung himself. There was a lot of people who just ran at the mouth, journalists, music journalists, ran at the mouth about it was Dylan's fault. And I'm sure that Dylan didn't feel that or anything, but I didn't know. So I said, he called me, saying going to hang himself, and I knew him very well, and that's absolute rubbish. He adored you, and we did talk a lot. Now that you remind me, we talked a lot about Dylan's songs and lyrics, and great admirer. And Dylan, who had the only other time I had met him, I put my hand out to shake his hand, and my hand is still there. He wouldn't even lift his hand to shake my hand. That was his way. Is that people, "Oh no, he never shakes hands." Dylan shook my hand and thanked me for having told him. I think he, dramatic guy, but I think he appreciated hearing that. And you have to remember, at that time, a lot of people were ascribing different things to Phil's killing.
Yeah. I don't think if there was any kind of jealousy there, I don't think it was personal, and I don't think it overshadowed his admiration for Dylan one bit.
I can't, it totally is in character for him to have said at some point, "Fucking Dylan," I could have been, at some point when I was drunk or someplace in New York in an apartment in some situation. But he never said that to me, and never, and my time with him was 90% sober with him, not me, but him. Mm-hmm. He was sober and thoughtful and not reactionary. So if he said that to impress or to shock somebody at some time, I wouldn't call him a liar, but yeah. I didn't experience it.
No, you can kind of see right through it. You said he was sober most of the time when he was with you. It seems to me that you were good at keeping him in check with that.
Well, that would have been his, that would have been my purpose then, but I never saw myself as his keeper or doing that. That didn't occur to me until later. And he may have said to me that this helps me. Mm-hmm. Mainly, it wasn't about drinking, but his own demons in his own mind and the battles he was going through, that liquor seemed to help, and he knew it wasn't good for him. So he felt being active. He felt coming over and playing backgammon, to be around somebody, be around some action. He said it wasn't he would be, in the corner of the room. People didn't even know he was at the studio. He would just be there observing. It just sort of always see him like with his notebook, but his mind was a notebook. So he's just clocking everything. And he never felt the urge to have to say anything to anybody about his point of view. But he did during the Watergate hearings know why everybody was there. They were watching him. So occasionally he would rock Nixon or do something, and everybody, oh, good. That's why we came to your Phil. Why don't you ask him this? He fulfilled his role, but not as a as a commentator or
Right.
or a color announcer.
The Oracle, as you
Yeah.
say. Do you have a favorite memory of Phil, or did you already express it to me?
Favorite memory of Phil. I don't have one that pops to mind. I think our one-on-one, he had already, see, I've taken over this role with many, many people because I'm up 5 o'clock in the morning and I've read the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the LA Times, the San Francisco Chronicle, other blogs and things by 7 o'clock in the morning. And I have a number of friends of mine that will call me about one thing or another, or what's news. And when I was on the road with rock bands, I paid attention to the news. Not like I do now, but I did. It was read newspapers. And so Jim Morrison, for instance, or different artists, Janis Joplin, different artists that I'm working with, didn't pay any attention to the news. We'd say, what's news? So they want to know what I thought was important in the news that day. And then they didn't feel obligated to read a paper or look at any news. And so the role reversal, he did that and would come in and tell me what the news was and stories behind what they were.
Just kind of instilled that in you. That's
Yeah.
cool.
And as it turned out, the reporter who came through the door, he and I became fast friends. And up until his death, I would go over to his house and watch other people's newscasts and scream at him. You don't have to do a live stand-up from this place. The crime happened hours ago. He would, and why that cutaway shot? What is this walk and talk crap? Just tell me what happened. So I got a lot of my sort of powers of observation of the news from Wayne Satz as well as Phil Ochs as the circle that you talk about.
Small circle of friends. Let's get into Kansas City Bomber. How did that all start?
Mainly our poker games took place at Phil's house on Rangeley, but I hosted a couple of them at this management firm I was working at that had beautiful offices. And so after everybody had left the office in the evening, the crowd would come over, Peter Asher and Van Dyke Parks, I believe. And anyway, 6 or so of us would play nickel, dime, quarter, nothing that would kill you. You could lose $25 if you were really bad, and I was. Or you could walk out with maybe $50 because Peter Asher always threw a lot of money at the table, and that's one of the reasons that Phil insisted that he be there. If we couldn't get Peter to the game, it wasn't worth having. And this management firm managed Raquel Welch. And so we were involved in some fashion with the production. I wasn't, but the guy I worked for was involved in some fashion with the production. And I'm sitting in his office, and he said, "Well, you're in the music business, and we're looking around for some sort of a theme song." Ah. So at the poker game, I said, "Well, the boss just said, oh, roller derby." And Phil loved wrestling, would go to wrestling matches in the seediest part of Los Angeles, and he knew all the wrestlers, he knew all the roller derby stars. This was, he loved that. So he said, "I'm going to do something. I'm going to write something." And I did everything I could to dampen his enthusiasm for fear that he would be, it's a crapshoot. And sure enough, he submitted it. I don't even know if they listened to it. Assume they did. But they chose to go another direction. They have music directors of these things. And my boss wasn't the music director. The manager of Raquel Welch. So it didn't get done. And there was some clear disappointment on the part of Phil. Did it lead to his suicide? No. And he wrote a really good song.
It's so good.
As you point out to me, I'll never hear it. I thought that the single that I have was that, but now you reminded me that it was done when he was down in Australia with a pickup band that he had found.
I still want to hear that Mickey Dolenz cut, because I don't know where it is.
Yeah. I don't think I ever had a copy of it. If I did, I wouldn't have it. It'd be long, and it'd be in a box somewhere, and probably not good anymore.
Right.
But I was in the at Mickey's studio with it when he recorded it. I was shocked when he came to me with the single that gave me a production credit, because I had nothing to do whatsoever with the record. I mean, I guess the inspiration to write it, I was just being nice to a friend.
Right.
I've never had a royalty, of course, but
well, how much does it get played? And it was released. They put it on a compilation album, I think.
Yeah. In those days in the music business, we used to say records like that escaped. They weren't released.
Apparently, he wanted it out. He released it back with Gas
Well,
Station Women.
he was friends. He would go to the A&M lot, and he'd sit down with David Anderley, was his friend, who was a big producer there, and was Mo Austin, and they had respect for him. So, as respect for what we can put this out with no anticipation. Nobody really distributed it or worked the record, but they put it out for him.
Yeah.
No, it was out of respect for him.
Right.
He was clearly out of his mind at that point too.
Yeah. Is there anything that you wish more people understood about Phil?
He was a hell of a great guy. He was truly a good guy and a good friend. He was a good friend. And yeah, I mean, in the last year or so of his life, and before I met him, I understand that he could be high maintenance, high drama surrounded him. But that wasn't my experience. My experience was that he was truly the best friend I've ever had.
Wow.
So to my friend Phil Ochs, and to Sean Penn for bringing him back to me. And to you for giving me this chance to visit with ghosts. And to keep the flame. What did she say to you?
Sorry?
What did Sunny say to you about?
She said she's chosen me to carry on his legacy.
Well, I have an expression that I use that I'll confer upon you. Passing the torch because my fingers are burning. So do that. And he feels worth it.
Yeah.
And it'll be, people will like Phil and should know Phil as I knew him. And maybe his music will resonate a little bit more to people who get to know him a little bit better. And as the times, sorry, Bob, aren't always changing, it's kind of repeating itself. These songs are sort of timeless in a way, many of them.
Yeah, for sure. I hope you know that I am not alone. I'm not the single 25-year-old that's into Phil Ochs. We actually
There's a club.
there's a growing population of young people now
That
who
pleases
are
me. Yeah, that pleases me a lot. Yeah, I I don't get into that. I've stayed away from the Laura Nero chat rooms because it's uh, it's voyeuristic or whatever I get from it. It's just too much, and I will post from time to time his birthday, Laura, or whomever, Harry.
How do you think he'd react to this little growing population of young people who are interested in him and still love and appreciate him and his music?
Oh, he would be thrilled. He'd be thrilled. He'd be thrilled. He would give you all the time you ever wanted.
That'll make me
He
cry.
was that way with people. He was not inaccessible.
I think that's what I think that's what connects. I was talking about this with my friends. How he was so accessible and open and genuine. He just seems like that kind of person.
Well, he always saw himself as a man of the people. He was just a people kind of guy, and he also appreciated the country western stars or country western artists or the other artists that would go out and greet their. I think we went to a Harry Chapin con.
Oh wow.
Phil got to know Gary Trudeau, who was a friend of mine, and who does Doonesbury. And Phil had Gary was friends with Harry Chapin, and so we went to a Harry Chapin concert at the Hollywood Bowl, and Harry was out there like a country western star, like signed every autograph, greeted everybody till the last person left. That's show business. That's classy.
Yeah.
Phil. At least I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that there were concerts where he was not social
Everyone has
afterward,
those days.
but his nature was that.
Yeah. Yeah.
He appreciated that. He appreciated people. We could be on our various hamburger runs. We would sit and start talking to somebody. Didn't matter a person's station in life, or they were a celebrity or anybody. It just they were, you'd strike up a conversation if somebody was interesting. He'd go with it as long as it could. He enjoyed people.
That's really great to hear. Well, I think we're almost done here. Do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Not really. I can't think of anything, but you know my number. Something comes to mind, you give me a call. Feel free.
I will. I genuinely, I really appreciate these kinds of conversations because Obviously, I can't speak to Phil, and it's like
Well, maybe you could find Sean.
yeah, maybe it's
Yeah.
like it's like having the pieces of the puzzle just kind of fall in place, and it's like putting together this person who I never knew who I want to know, and um, it really means the world to have these conversations with people who were close to Phil, because it cements his personhood, his humanity.
He deeply felt things deeper than most people. I mean, Laura Nero was like that. Events deeply affect her. And Phil deeply felt the condition of the world and what was going on. Deeply felt it. I mean, and the difference between him and musicians, like Ringo Starr's favorite thing to say was, "Don't get real on me."
Peace and love.
Phil wanted you to get real on him.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for sitting down and talking to me
Sorry,
about
it's my pleasure.
Phil. He's my hero, truly. Um,
Well, you've got good taste.
all right. Well, if you don't have any more to add, anything to plug.
I got nothing to plug, nothing to add. It's been a total pleasure, a great way to spend the Sunday morning here in San Francisco.
Of course, the pleasure's all mine. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you again, Mr. Housekeeper. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your
Tori, it's Lee. Thank you, please. And it's also
Lee.
housekeeper. Housekeeper. Come on. This is Lee's better.
I was worried how to address you. I didn't want to.
Yeah, Mr. Housekeeper is fine too.
I'm already so unprofessional.
You're quite good, and you let it flow.
Thank you.
You don't have a pre checklist of exactly where. You have to talk to people who want to have me say certain things that they've got an idea of what they want to put into their show.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. Can you say it this way? And yeah.
No, I wanna hear everything there is to hear.
You're
the
a
way you
good
tell
interviewer.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Well, thank you again. We're gonna do the Midwest goodbye, where you stand at the front door for 45 minutes.
See ya, Iowa.
You have a wonderful rest of your day.
You too.
California.
You too. Thank you.
Thank
you for the chance of visiting with my friend Phil.
You've been listening to God Help the Troubadour, the eternal voice of Phil Ochs, created by me, Tori Nelson, creative consultant Marie McCarthy. Once again, today's guest was Lee Houskeeper. Remember, you can find an extended version of this interview and more on patreon.com/GodHelpTheTroubadour. If you love the show and your podcast platform of choice allows for ratings and reviews, please consider leaving me a 5-star rating. Farewells and fantasies, folks.